Good afternoon, Steelers Nation. I hope you're all having an incredible day. Welcome back to the channel, your home for the latest Pittsburgh Steelers news, rumors, breaking updates, and everything happening with the black and gold. Today's story is one that every Steelers fan needs to pay close attention to because there's a major development that could have a significant impact on the team's future. We'll break down exactly what's happening, why it matters, and what it could mean for Pittsburgh as the season continues to take shape. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications so you never miss any Steelers news, and if you believe this team is ready to compete for something special this season, smash that like button. Now, let's get straight into today's Pittsburgh Steelers news. One of the biggest discussions surrounding the Pittsburgh Steelers right now has nothing to do with a game that has already been played. Instead, it's about expectations, confidence, and whether this roster has finally reached the point where it can take the next step after years of falling just short. Several important questions have been raised about this team, and when you put them together, they paint a fascinating picture of where the Steelers stand heading into the season. One topic that immediately stands out is the future of Joey Porter Jr. His next contract is already becoming a major point of conversation because elite cornerbacks across the NFL are resetting the market. The question isn't whether Porter deserves a new deal. Almost everyone agrees he has developed into one of the foundational pieces of Pittsburgh's defense. The real debate centers on how much the Steelers should actually be willing to pay. There is a noticeable separation between the very highest paid cornerbacks in football and the next tier, and that distinction could end up working in Pittsburgh's favor. While Joey Porter Jr. has continued to improve and has established himself as one of the league's rising young defensive backs, there is still uncertainty about whether he belongs in that absolute top salary bracket. The belief is that both sides ultimately want the same outcome. Porter wants to remain in Pittsburgh, and the organization clearly views him as an important part of its long-term future. Because of that mutual interest, there is optimism that an agreement will eventually be reached, even if negotiations take some time before the regular season. At the same time, another conversation is generating plenty of excitement, and it involves the player many believe could completely transform the Steelers' offense this year. DK Metcalf enters the season with enormous expectations, and there are strong reasons to believe his production could explode. Unlike previous years, opposing defenses may no longer be able to dedicate all of their attention to stopping one receiver. With multiple offensive weapons expected to contribute throughout the season, Pittsburgh could force defenses into difficult situations. If safeties are occupied elsewhere and linebackers are forced to respect additional receiving threats, Metcalf could find himself facing far more one-on-one opportunities than many people expect. Those situations are exactly where he has built his reputation throughout his career. His combination of size, speed, physicality, and ability after the catch creates matchup problems for virtually every secondary in football. If the offense functions the way many believe it can, there is a legitimate possibility that Metcalf delivers one of the most productive seasons of his career while becoming the centerpiece of Pittsburgh's passing attack. But as exciting as the offense may look, there is another newcomer who could quietly become one of the most valuable players on the entire roster. Jalen Ramsey is expected to wear multiple hats within Patrick Graham's defensive system, and that's what makes his addition so intriguing. Rather than locking him into one traditional position, Pittsburgh appears ready to use him wherever he creates the biggest advantage. Depending on the situation, Ramsey could line up as a big nickel defender, move closer to the line of scrimmage, or even function as a dime linebacker on passing downs. That kind of versatility gives the Steelers the flexibility to disguise coverages, confuse quarterbacks, and create favorable matchups throughout the game. Instead of simply asking Ramsey to shadow receivers, Pittsburgh could maximize his football intelligence by allowing him to impact nearly every level of the defense. Those individual storylines naturally lead to the biggest question surrounding this entire season. What actually defines success for the Steelers? For some fans, simply reaching the playoffs again won't be enough. Pittsburgh has consistently remained competitive over the past several seasons, but early postseason exits have left many supporters wanting much more. That's why expectations are beginning to shift. There are really two different ways this season could ultimately be viewed as a success. The first is obvious. The Steelers need to prove they belong among the small group of legitimate Super Bowl contenders once January arrives. Not simply a playoff team, but a team capable of beating anyone in the AFC when the stakes are highest. If Pittsburgh reaches that level, many of the aggressive roster decisions made over the past year will immediately look justified. The second possibility looks beyond this season. If Aaron Rodgers' presence helps prepare the franchise's next long-term quarterback through mentorship and development, then this year could pay dividends that extend well into the future. Even if the immediate results fall short of a championship, establishing stability at the quarterback position for years to come could completely reshape the direction of the organization. Those possibilities explain why emotions among Steelers fans are so mixed right now. Some supporters remain cautious after experiencing multiple seasons that ended in disappointment despite respectable regular season records. Others look at the upgraded roster and genuinely believe this team has far more talent than recent Pittsburgh squads. Both viewpoints have understandable arguments, which makes this one of the most fascinating seasons the Steelers have entered in years. The talent appears to be there, the expectations continue to rise, the pressure is growing with every passing week, but when you look at everything together, from Joey Porter Jr.'s future, to DK Metcalf's potential breakout, to Jalen Ramsey's unique role, and the enormous expectations surrounding the entire roster, the biggest question may not be whether the Steelers are talented enough. The real question is whether this group can finally turn all of that talent into meaningful postseason success. What do you think, Steelers Nation? Is this finally the roster that can break through and become a true Super Bowl contender? Or do you still believe there are too many unanswered questions before believing this team can take that next step? Another topic that generated a lot of discussion revolves around the overall identity of this Steelers roster and why opinions about the team's outlook remain so divided. Every offseason seems to bring renewed optimism, yet many fans continue to predict another season that finishes around the same record Pittsburgh has posted in recent years. The question is simple. If the roster appears stronger on paper, why are so many people still hesitant to believe? A large part of that skepticism comes from recent history. The Steelers have consistently remained competitive, but being competitive and being a legitimate championship contender are two very different things. Winning 10 games means very little if the season ends with another early playoff exit. That pattern has created frustration among the fan base, and until this team proves otherwise on the field, some supporters simply refuse to raise their expectations. Still, there are reasons to believe this year's team could be different. The defense in particular is drawing significant praise because of the amount of talent spread across every level of the unit. Up front, Pittsburgh has assembled a defensive line that appears capable of controlling games both against the run and as pass rushers. The addition of Derek Harmon adds another talented young piece. Sebastian Joseph Day strengthens the run defense. Cam Heyward continues to perform at an elite level, and Keeanu Benton provides valuable depth inside. Then there is the edge rushing group, which many believe could become one of the NFL's best. TJ Watt remains one of football's premier defensive playmakers. Alex Highsmith continues to be an extremely productive complementary pass rusher, and Nick Herbig gives Pittsburgh another dangerous weapon capable of creating pressure. Add Jack Sawyer as additional depth, and suddenly the Steelers have the kind of rotation that allows them to keep fresh pass rushers attacking quarterbacks throughout an entire game. That depth becomes even more dangerous when combined with Patrick Graham's defensive philosophy. Creative pressure packages, disguised blitzes, and multiple personnel looks could put opposing offenses in uncomfortable situations on a weekly basis. If Pittsburgh's run defense performs better than it did at times last season, opposing offenses may find themselves facing more obvious passing situations, giving those pass rushers even more opportunities to attack. There was also an interesting discussion surrounding Broderick Jones and what his immediate future may look like after working his way back from the neck injury that ended his previous season. The first priority remains his health. Nothing is more important than making sure he fully recovers before trying to return to regular NFL action. Because he was unable to maintain his normal strength training during rehabilitation, there are understandable concerns about how quickly he can regain the size and strength necessary to compete at the highest level. At the same time, the competition along Pittsburgh's offensive line has continued to evolve. Other tackles have stepped forward, and the coaching staff now has several options available. That creates a difficult path back into a starting role immediately, even if Broderick returns healthy. The focus appears to be giving him every opportunity to continue developing while making sure his long-term future is never compromised by rushing the process. Another fascinating point centered on what this organization may have lost during the prime years of some of its greatest defensive stars. There There is a belief that Pittsburgh did not always maximize the championship window created by players like TJ Watt and Cam Heyward. Both established themselves among the NFL's elite at their positions, yet postseason success remained elusive. Questions have been raised about whether the offense, quarterback situations, and overall roster construction prevented those defensive leaders from fully capitalizing on some of the best years of their careers. That perspective only increases the urgency surrounding this season. Veteran leaders are still capable of playing at an extremely high level, but everyone understands that opportunities to compete for championships do not last forever. Every season matters, especially when cornerstone players continue to perform at a Pro Bowl or All-Pro level. When you step back and look at everything together, it's easy to understand why excitement continues to build around this team. There are established veterans, impact newcomers, talented young players, and a defense that has the potential to become one of the league's most complete units. On paper, the ingredients appear to be there. Of course, paper means nothing once the regular season begins. Every prediction, every projection, and every optimistic discussion will eventually be replaced by what happens between the lines each Sunday. That's where this Steelers team has the opportunity to change the narrative that has followed the organization for the last several years. If the offense reaches its potential while the defense performs at the level many believe it can, Pittsburgh could finally become far more than just another playoff participant. They could emerge as one of the AFC's most dangerous teams when the games matter the most. Now it's your turn, Steelers Nation. Do you believe this roster is finally built to make a deep playoff run? Or do you think there are still too many questions that need to be answered before calling this team a true contender? One of the reasons expectations are so high for this Steelers team is because there are several areas where the roster appears noticeably stronger than it has been in recent seasons. But having more talent on paper has never guaranteed success in the NFL. What separates championship teams from good teams is their ability to turn potential into consistent production, and that's exactly the challenge Pittsburgh faces. Take the defensive side of the ball, for example. There is legitimate excitement surrounding how Patrick Graham could utilize the versatility of his personnel. Instead of asking every player to fit into one rigid role, the Steelers now have defenders capable of lining up in multiple positions depending on the situation. That flexibility makes offenses spend extra time preparing each week because they cannot simply assume Pittsburgh will line up the same way every snap. Jalen Ramsey perfectly represents that philosophy. His value goes far beyond covering wide receivers. By